The store manager's face turned pale as the woman's voice rang out across the store. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Did you just say you're the new owner?" The once confident sneer melted into a mask of panic as whispers rippled among the staff and the other customers standing nearby. All eyes were glued to the woman who had been mocked and humiliated only minutes earlier, standing tall now with an undeniable air of authority. She smiled, a calm, knowing smile, and nodded. "Yes, I did. And I think we need to talk about how you treat your customers." Her voice was gentle, but carried the weight of someone who wasn't going to back down. The manager's breath hitched as he exchanged nervous glances with the sales clerks, who had been laughing along with him earlier. The room felt as if it held its breath. No one could have guessed this disheveled woman in a worn sweater and scuffed shoes was anything but an ordinary shopper. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife as everyone waited to see what she would do next. Earlier that morning, Melissa Carter had woken up feeling a mix of excitement and apprehension. It was her first full day in town since finalizing the purchase of the upscale boutique her late husband had loved. The boutique, a local gem in the community, had been his dream business before his sudden passing. Taking over the store was her way of honoring his memory and building something meaningful. Despite her excitement, Melissa didn't feel the need to dress up. She slipped into her most comfortable clothes, a cozy gray sweater and a pair of sneakers she'd owned for years. She wasn't worried about appearances today. Instead, she wanted to get a feel for the store from a customer's perspective. Melissa entered the boutique with a shy smile, her dark curls tucked under a beanie. The store was bustling, with customers browsing racks of expensive clothing and accessories. The smell of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the faint scent of designer perfume. She wandered through the aisles, quietly observing the displays, but her heart sank when she noticed the employees. The sales staff, all wearing sharp uniforms, seemed to prioritize the wealthier-looking customers. They gushed over a woman in a fur coat, calling her ma'am and offering her a latte while ignoring Melissa entirely. When she tried to approach a sales clerk to ask a question, the young woman barely hid her irritation. Do you have this jacket in a size medium?" Melissa asked softly, holding up a hanger. The clerk didn't even look at her. "Probably not. It's expensive," she said curtly before walking away to chat with a coworker. Melissa frowned but let it go. She continued browsing, determined not to let their behavior ruin her morning. That was, until she overheard them talking about her. "Did you see that lady with the old sneakers?" One of the clerks whispered, giggling. "She looks like she got lost on her way to the thrift store." Another clerk snorted. "I bet she's just here to gawk at the prices. People like that can't afford anything in here." Melissa felt her cheeks burn as the laughter echoed behind her. She bit her lip, debating whether to confront them or leave. But just as she turned to go, she noticed the store manager walking toward her. For a brief moment, she thought he might step in and address the rude behavior. Instead, he looked her up and down with a raised eyebrow. "Ma'am," he said in a tone dripping with condescension, "this isn't the kind of place where you can just browse. Our items are exclusive." Melissa blinked, taken aback. "I'm aware of that," she replied evenly. The manager smirked. "Are you sure? Because we've had issues before with people who come in and, let's just say, can't afford anything. It's a waste of our time." The clerks giggled again, clearly emboldened by their boss's attitude. Melissa's hands clenched at her sides, but she forced herself to stay calm. She looked the manager straight in the eye and said, "You shouldn't judge people by how they look." The manager scoffed. "And you shouldn't take offense so easily, ma'am. It's just business." That was the moment Melissa decided enough was enough. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the small stack of legal papers she'd brought with her, just in case. Unfolding them with deliberate care, she held them out to the manager. "You might want to read this," she said, her voice firm. The manager frowned but took the papers. As his eyes scanned the document, his smirk faded. His hands began to shake as he read the words confirming Melissa as the sole proprietor of the boutique. This can't be right," he stammered, his face growing paler by the second. "It's right," Melissa replied, her voice steady. "I'm the new owner." The murmurs in the store grew louder as the staff and customers tried to process what had just happened. Melissa could see the panic in the manager's eyes, but she didn't feel any satisfaction yet. She had only just begun to make her point. She took a deep breath, preparing to address the room, but before she could speak, the sound of a crash came from the back of the store. One of the employees had dropped a display rack, the loud noise making everyone jump. Melissa turned her gaze toward the commotion, her mind racing. Whatever had just happened wasn't going to distract her from dealing with the problem at hand. She was determined to make things right, not just for herself, but for anyone else who had ever felt unwelcome in a place like this. The crash echoed through the boutique, silencing the murmurs as everyone turned toward the source of the commotion. A young employee, visibly flustered, scrambled to pick up the toppled display rack. Jewelry and accessories were scattered across the floor, and her face flushed with embarrassment as she bent down to gather the items. Melissa's gaze lingered for a moment before she shifted her attention back to the store manager, who was still clutching the legal documents. His expression was a mixture of disbelief and growing dread. "What happens next?" Melissa began, her voice calm but resolute. "Depends entirely on you and your staff." She let the words hang in the air, making it clear she wasn't here to play games. The manager stammered, his earlier arrogance completely gone. I assure you, ma'am, we can fix this misunderstanding. I didn't realize that I was the owner." Melissa interrupted, her tone sharp. "Would it have mattered if I wasn't? Is this how you treat anyone who doesn't meet your standards?" The room was deathly silent. The staff exchanged uneasy glances, their earlier smugness evaporating. Melissa scanned their faces, her gaze settling on the two clerks who had mocked her earlier. They looked down at their shoes, suddenly fascinated by the floor. Before the manager could stumble through another excuse, a voice broke the tension. "Excuse me, ma'am," said a middle-aged woman standing near the cash register. She was clutching a designer purse and looked every bit the wealthy customer the boutique typically catered to. "I couldn't help overhearing. Are you really the new owner?" Melissa turned to her with a polite nod. "Yes, I am." The woman smiled warmly. "Good. This store could use some changes. I've shopped here for years, and I've seen how they treat people who don't fit their idea of a proper customer. It's about time someone did something about it." Melissa's heart swelled at the unexpected support. She smiled back at the woman, grateful for the encouragement. "Thank you. That's exactly what I plan to do." Earlier that week, when Melissa first visited the town, she'd been filled with hope. The boutique was nestled in a picturesque neighborhood lined with charming shops and cafes. The business had been thriving under its previous owner, but she knew it needed a fresh perspective to keep up with the changing times. After signing the final paperwork, she decided to keep her ownership quiet for a few days. She wanted to observe the store's operations without any bias. Little did she know how much work lay ahead. On her first visit to the boutique as a customer, Melissa had noticed small red flags. The displays were beautiful, but they catered to a very specific clientele. There was a subtle but unmistakable air of exclusivity, one that made certain customers feel unwelcome. But nothing could have prepared her for the blatant hostility she faced that morning. The condescending remarks, the dismissive attitudes, and the outright mockery weren't just unprofessional, they were unacceptable. Melissa had promised herself she wouldn't lose her temper, but standing there in that moment, she realized this was more than a personal insult. It was a problem with the entire culture of the store, and it needed to change. Back in the present, Melissa decided it was time to make her intentions clear. She stepped forward, addressing the room with the confidence of someone who had nothing to prove. "From this moment on," she announced, "this store will be a place where everyone feels welcome, regardless of how they look or what they're wearing. If any of you have a problem with that, you're free to leave." Her words hung in the air like a challenge. The staff exchanged nervous glances, unsure of how to respond. The manager opened his mouth to speak, but Melissa held up a hand to stop him. "Not you," she said firmly. "We'll talk in my office later." The manager's mouth snapped shut, and he nodded stiffly, clearly uncomfortable. Melissa turned her attention to the young employee who had knocked over the display rack. The girl was still kneeling on the floor, frantically gathering the scattered items. "Take your time," Melissa said gently. "It's okay." The girl looked up, surprised by the kindness in Melissa's tone. She gave a small, grateful nod and continued her task more calmly. Melissa turned back to the customers, many of whom were watching her with a mix of curiosity and admiration. "Thank you all for your patience," she said, addressing them directly. "I hope you'll give us a chance to show you how things are going to improve around here." The woman with the designer purse gave her an encouraging smile. "I'll be back," she said, "and I'll bring my friends." Melissa smiled, her resolve strengthened by the woman's support. But before she could respond, the front door of the boutique swung open, and a man in a crisp suit entered. He looked around the room, his eyes narrowing as he took in the scene. "Melissa Carter?" he called out, his voice sharp. Melissa stiffened. She recognized the man. He was a representative from the corporate office overseeing the store's transition. His sudden appearance could only mean one thing. He'd heard about the incident. The tension in the boutique reached a breaking point as the man in the crisp suit strode toward Melissa. His polished shoes clicked against the marble floor, each step carrying a weight that made the staff and customers glance nervously at one another. The corporate representative, a no-nonsense man named Gregory Miller, held a leather folder in one hand and a tablet in the other. His expression was unreadable, but his sharp eyes missed nothing. "Melissa Carter?" he repeated, stopping just a few feet away from her. The entire store seemed to freeze, every eye fixed on the confrontation. Melissa straightened her posture, refusing to be intimidated. "Yes, I'm Melissa Carter. And you are?" "Gregory Miller," he replied, offering a curt nod. "I'm here on behalf of the corporate office. We've received some concerning reports about an incident here this morning." He glanced around the room, his gaze lingering on the visibly nervous staff before returning to Melissa. "Care to explain?" Melissa met his gaze without flinching. "I'd be happy to. But first, let me ask you something. Did the reports mention why there was an incident?" Gregory raised an eyebrow. "They mentioned a disruption involving the new owner of the store. Specifically, you." Melissa suppressed a sigh. Of course, the staff had probably tried to paint her as the problem. She gestured toward the rows of customers and employees who were watching silently. "I think it's better if you hear what happened directly from the people who were here." Gregory hesitated, clearly not expecting her response. He turned to the nearest customer, the middle-aged woman with the designer purse who had spoken up earlier. "Ma'am, can you confirm what occurred?" The woman stepped forward without hesitation. "I can. And let me tell you, this store has needed someone like her for a long time." She nodded toward Melissa. "The staff here have always been rude to anyone who doesn't fit their idea of who belongs in a boutique like this. They ignored her, mocked her, and treated her like she didn't deserve to be here. Until she told them she was the new owner." Gregory's eyes widened slightly, but he said nothing as the woman continued. "She stood up to them, and I think she's exactly what this place needs. She's going to make it better." Her words were met with murmurs of agreement from other customers. Gregory looked momentarily thrown off balance, but he quickly composed himself. "Thank you, ma'am," he said before turning back to Melissa. "Is that accurate?" "It is," Melissa said firmly, "and I don't think it's an isolated problem. From what I've observed, this store has fostered a culture that excludes and alienates anyone who doesn't meet certain superficial standards. That ends today." Gregory regarded her for a long moment, his expression inscrutable. "That's a strong accusation," he said finally. "What do you propose to do about it?" Melissa didn't hesitate. "First, I'm implementing mandatory training for all staff to address bias in customer service. Second, I'm revising our hiring practices to ensure diversity at every level of the business. And third, I'm going to personally oversee the day-to-day operations until I'm confident the culture has changed." Her words were met with a stunned silence. Even Gregory seemed taken aback by her decisiveness. Finally, he nodded slowly. "Those are bold steps," he said, "and they'll need approval from corporate." Melissa crossed her arms, her voice unwavering. "Then I suggest you get started on getting that approval. Because this isn't just about improving the store. It's about making it a place that reflects the values of the community." Gregory studied her for a moment longer before giving a short nod. "I'll take your suggestions back to the board. In the meantime, I'll be conducting a formal review of the staff's conduct. Expect my report within the week. Looking forward to it, Melissa said, her tone calm but firm. As Gregory left the boutique, the atmosphere shifted. The staff looked uneasy, knowing they were under scrutiny, while the customers exchanged whispers, clearly intrigued by the drama unfolding before them. Melissa took a deep breath, steadying herself. This was far from over, but she wasn't going to back down. She turned to the manager, who was standing stiffly by the cash register, his face pale. "Mr. Collins," she said, addressing him by name for the first time. "My office." "Now." The man swallowed hard but nodded, following her to the small office in the back of the store. Once inside, Melissa closed the door and gestured for him to sit. "Do you know why I called you in here?" she asked, leaning against the desk. Collins shifted uncomfortably. "I assume it's about the misunderstanding earlier." Melissa narrowed her eyes. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was disrespect, plain and simple. And it starts at the top. As the manager, you set the tone for your staff. If they think it's acceptable to mock customers, it's because you've allowed it, or worse, encouraged it. Collins opened his mouth to protest, but Melissa held up a hand. "Let me be clear. I'm giving you a chance to turn this around. But if I see even a hint of the behavior I witnessed this morning, you're out. Understood?" The manager nodded quickly, his face flushing with embarrassment. "Yes, ma'am. I understand." Melissa straightened, her expression softening slightly. "Good. Now, go back out there and start making things right." As the day wore on, Melissa spent time interacting with the customers and getting to know the remaining staff. She learned that some of them had been uncomfortable with the toxic culture but felt powerless to change it. She reassured them that things were going to be different and encouraged them to share their ideas for improvement. By the time the store closed, the atmosphere had already begun to shift. Melissa felt a sense of cautious optimism as she locked up for the night. But just as she was leaving, her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. The message read, "You're making enemies, Melissa. Be careful who you trust." Her heart skipped a beat as she stared at the screen. Who had sent it? And what did it mean? Melissa's pulse quickened as she reread the cryptic message on her phone. "You're making enemies, Melissa. Be careful who you trust." The words swirled in her mind, heavy with unspoken threats. She scanned her surroundings, the dimly lit parking lot suddenly feeling more ominous than it had moments ago. The boutique's streetlights cast long, eerie shadows, and Melissa instinctively clutched her bag tighter. Who could have sent the message? Was it one of the staff members? A disgruntled former employee? Or someone else entirely? She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, but when she looked around, the lot was empty. She took a deep breath, willing herself to stay calm. "Focus, Melissa. This is just intimidation. You've dealt with worse." She unlocked her car and slid into the driver's seat, making sure the doors were securely locked before she drove off. The next morning, Melissa arrived at the boutique earlier than usual, determined to get ahead of whatever challenges the day might bring. She couldn't let fear distract her. There was too much at stake. Inside the store, the atmosphere was tense. The staff, still reeling from the previous day's events, were unusually quiet as they went about their tasks. Melissa noticed Collins, the manager, lingering near the register with a clipboard, glancing nervously in her direction every few minutes. "Good morning, everyone," Melissa said brightly, her tone warm but firm. "Let's start the day with a quick meeting. Please gather in the break room." The staff shuffled into the break room, their expressions a mixture of apprehension and curiosity. Melissa waited until everyone was seated before she began. "I want to thank you all for being here today," she started. "I know yesterday was eventful, and I understand that change can be uncomfortable. But I need you to know that my goal isn't to make your jobs harder. It's to make this boutique a place we can all be proud of." She paused, letting her words sink in before continuing. "That said, I won't tolerate disrespect toward customers or each other. If anyone feels they can't align with that vision, now is the time to speak up." The room was silent. Melissa scanned their faces, searching for any signs of dissent. Most of the staff avoided her gaze, but a few nodded hesitantly. "Good," she said, her tone softening. "I want this to be a fresh start for all of us. Let's work together to make it happen." As the meeting broke up, One of the younger employees, a timid girl named Emily, lingered behind. "Miss Carter," she said hesitantly. "Call me Melissa," she said with a smile. "What's on your mind?" Emily fidgeted with the hem of her uniform. "I just wanted to say thank you for standing up for yourself yesterday. I've always hated the way things were run here, but I was too scared to speak up." Melissa's heart warmed at the girl's sincerity. "You're welcome, Emily. And thank you for saying that. It means a lot." Emily gave a small smile before hurrying off to start her shift. Melissa felt a renewed sense of determination. She wasn't just changing a store. She was giving people like Emily a chance to feel valued. The morning passed without incident, and Melissa was beginning to feel optimistic. She spent time reorganizing displays, chatting with customers, and even lending a hand at the register. The energy in the store felt lighter, as if the toxic cloud that had hung over it was starting to lift. But just as she was beginning to relax, a man walked into the boutique, and the atmosphere shifted. He was tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in an expensive suit that seemed tailored to perfection. His expression was cold and calculating, and his piercing gaze immediately locked onto Melissa. She straightened, her instincts on high alert. "Good morning," she said, forcing a polite smile. "Welcome to the boutique. How can I help you?" The man didn't return her smile. Instead, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card, handing it to her without a word. Melissa took it and read the name. Richard Graves, Corporate Legal Counsel. Her stomach sank. "Mr. Graves," she said cautiously, "what brings you here today?" "I'm here on behalf of the corporate office," he said, his voice clipped. "There have been concerns about your recent actions as the new owner. I'd like to review your management practices and ensure they align with company policy." Melissa's jaw tightened. "I assure you, my actions are entirely within company policy. But you're welcome to review anything you need." Graves gave a tight smile. "I appreciate your cooperation. I'll also be interviewing your staff and customers to get a better understanding of the situation." Melissa nodded, though her mind was racing. This wasn't just a routine visit. Graves was here to undermine her. She could feel it. As Graves began his so-called review, Melissa kept a close eye on him. He questioned staff members one by one, his demeanor calm but intimidating. When he wasn't interviewing someone, he wandered the store, taking notes on a small tablet. The tension among the staff was palpable. Even the customers seemed uneasy, casting curious glances at the imposing figure in the suit. Melissa did her best to maintain a calm, professional demeanor, but the weight of the situation was starting to wear on her. By mid-afternoon, Graves approached her again. "Miss Carter," he said, his tone neutral, "I've completed my preliminary review. I'll be submitting my findings to the corporate board. May I ask what those findings are?" Melissa asked, keeping her voice steady. Graves' lips curled into a faint smirk. "You'll be informed of the board's decision in due course. Have a good day." With that, he turned and left, leaving Melissa standing in the middle of the boutique with a sinking feeling in her chest. That evening, as she locked up the store, her phone buzzed again. This time, the message read, "Watch your back. He's not your only problem." Melissa stared at the message on her phone, her mind racing. "Watch your back. He's not your only problem." The ominous words sent a chill down her spine, but she refused to let fear consume her. Whoever was behind this was clearly trying to intimidate her, and she wasn't about to give them the satisfaction of seeing her crumble. She tucked the phone back into her pocket and drove home, her thoughts spinning. Could the message have come from someone in the corporate office? One of the disgruntled employees? Or maybe someone entirely unexpected? The possibilities were endless, and the uncertainty gnawed at her resolve. The next morning, Melissa arrived at the boutique early again, determined to stay ahead of whatever new challenges might arise. She spent the first hour reviewing inventory and planning a new marketing campaign that would attract a broader range of customers. If she was going to change the store's culture, she needed to start with its image. As she worked, her assistant manager, a soft-spoken woman named Rachel, knocked on the door of the office. "Melissa?" Rachel said, peeking her head inside. "There's a man here asking to see you. He says it's urgent." Melissa looked up from her laptop, her brow furrowing. "Did he say who he is?" Rachel hesitated. He didn't give a name, but he looked serious. Should I ask him to wait? Melissa nodded. Send him in. I'll handle it. Moments later, a tall man in his mid-40s stepped into the office. He was dressed casually in jeans and a leather jacket, but his sharp eyes gave off an air of authority. He closed the door behind him and extended a hand. Melissa Carter? He asked. Yes, Melissa replied, shaking his hand. And you are? Detective Harris, he said, flashing a badge. I'm with the local police department. Melissa's heart skipped a beat. Detective? Is something wrong? Harris took a seat across from her, his expression serious. We received a report about some suspicious activity involving your store. I need to ask you a few questions. Melissa's stomach tightened. Suspicious activity? What kind of activity? Harris pulled out a notebook and flipped through a few pages. We've been informed that someone may be targeting you. Threats, harassment, that sort of thing. Have you noticed anything unusual lately? Melissa hesitated, debating whether to mention the messages. Finally, she nodded. Yes, I've received a couple of strange texts. They seemed threatening. Harris's pen moved quickly over the page. Do you have the messages on your phone? Melissa handed her phone to him, and he examined the texts carefully. His brows knitted together as he read the most recent one. Do you have any idea who might be behind this? No, Melissa admitted, but it started after I took over the store. There's been some resistance to the changes I'm making, so it could be anyone. Harris nodded, his expression thoughtful. Do you have security cameras in the store? Yes, Melissa said, but they haven't picked up anything unusual. Still, I'd like to take a look at the footage, Harris said, standing up. And if you get any more messages, call me immediately. Melissa agreed, feeling a mix of relief and apprehension. As the detective left, she couldn't shake the feeling that the situation was far more serious than she'd initially thought. Later that day, Melissa tried to focus on her work, but the weight of the detective's visit lingered in her mind. She busied herself by meeting with the staff, going over new policies and discussing plans for a customer appreciation event. The team seemed more engaged than before, though there were still a few who remained distant. Emily, the young employee who had spoken to Melissa the day before, approached her after the meeting. Miss Carter? I mean Melissa, she said, her voice tentative. Yes, Emily? Melissa replied with a warm smile. I just wanted to say, I've been thinking about what you said, about making this place welcoming for everyone. I think it's a really good idea. She hesitated, then added, if you ever need help with anything, I'd be happy to volunteer. Melissa's heart swelled with gratitude. Thank you, Emily. That means a lot to me, and I'll definitely take you up on that. As Emily walked away, Melissa felt a renewed sense of purpose. She was making progress, even if it was slow, but her optimism was short-lived. That evening, just as the store was closing, the lights flickered. Melissa, who had been reviewing sales reports in the office, frowned and glanced toward the door. A moment later, the power went out completely, plunging the store into darkness. Rachel? Melissa called out, her voice steady despite the sudden fear creeping into her chest. Is everything okay out there? There was no response. Melissa grabbed her phone and turned on the flashlight, making her way cautiously toward the front of the store. The faint beam of light illuminated the racks of clothing and the polished floors, but the silence was unnerving. As she approached the register, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. A single mannequin, which had been standing near the entrance, was now toppled over. Its limbs were splayed awkwardly, and its blank face seemed to stare up at her accusingly. Her phone buzzed in her hand, making her jump. She glanced at the screen and saw another message. You should have stayed away. Now it's too late. Her breath caught in her throat as she scanned the store, her heart pounding. Who was doing this? And how far were they willing to go? Suddenly, there was a loud knock at the glass door, and Melissa whipped around, her flashlight landing on a shadowy figure standing just outside. Melissa froze, the flashlight beam trembling slightly in her hand as she stared at the shadowy figure outside the glass door. Her mind raced, torn between fear and determination. Who was out there? What did they want? The figure knocked again, harder this time. Melissa took a deep breath and steadied herself. She wasn't about to let fear take control. Slowly, she approached the door, keeping the flashlight aimed at the stranger. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice firm despite the rapid thumping of her heart. The figure stepped closer into the light, revealing Detective Harris. He held up his badge with one hand and motioned for her to unlock the door with the other. "It's me, Detective Harris," he said, his voice calm but urgent. "Open up. I need to talk to you." Relief flooded through Melissa as she unlocked the door and let him in. "Detective, what are you doing here? The power just went out and—" "I know," Harris interrupted, glancing around the dimly lit boutique. "That's why I'm here. The police received an anonymous tip that someone might try to sabotage your store tonight." Melissa's breath caught in her throat. "Sabotage? You mean this wasn't just an accident?" Harris shook his head. "It's too coincidental. The power outage, the messages you've been getting, and now this." He gestured toward the toppled mannequin. "Do you know how that happened?" Melissa shook her head. "No. I found it like this when I came out here." Harris crouched beside the mannequin, inspecting it closely. "Whoever did this is trying to intimidate you, but they might have left something behind. Do you have a backup generator or battery-powered lights?" "Yes, in the back," Melissa said, leading him toward the storage room. She flipped a switch, and a soft, steady glow from the emergency lights filled the store. Harris nodded approvingly. "Good. That'll help." As Harris began inspecting the boutique, Melissa stayed close, her nerves on edge. He examined the mannequin, checked the doors and windows, and even reviewed the camera system. After a few minutes, he turned back to her. "Your cameras didn't record anything during the outage," he said. "Whoever did this might have known how to cut the power to disable the system." Melissa felt a chill run down her spine. "So they've been watching me. They know the store." "Possibly," Harris said. "Do you have any employees or associates who might hold a grudge? Anyone who'd want to see you fail?" Melissa thought about it, her mind racing through the possibilities. The most obvious suspect was Collins, the manager, but despite his arrogance and lack of professionalism, she couldn't imagine him going this far. Then there were the clerks who had mocked her when she first visited the store. Could one of them be behind this? Or was it someone higher up in the corporate chain, angry about her changes? "I'm not sure," Melissa admitted. "There's tension with some of the staff, and I've had issues with corporate resistance, but nothing that seemed dangerous." Harris frowned. "Whoever it is, they're escalating. I'd recommend you stay vigilant. I'll assign an officer to patrol the area tonight, just in case." "Thank you," Melissa said, her voice steady but strained. "I appreciate it." After Harris left, Melissa spent the next hour resetting the store. She stood the mannequin upright, reorganized the displays, and double-checked the locks on every door and window. By the time she finished, it was past midnight, and exhaustion weighed heavily on her. She locked up the boutique and made her way to her car, her senses heightened with every step. The parking lot was eerily quiet, the only sound coming from the faint hum of a streetlight above. She glanced around one last time before getting into her car and driving home. The next morning, Melissa arrived at the store to find a small group of reporters gathered outside. Cameras flashed as she approached, and one of the reporters called out to her. "Ms. Carter, is it true your store was targeted last night? Do you believe this is connected to your recent management changes?" Melissa hesitated, taken aback by the sudden media attention. She hadn't expected word to spread so quickly. For a moment, she considered brushing past them, but then she realized this was an opportunity to control the narrative. She turned to face the reporters, her expression calm but resolute. "Yes, there was an incident at the store last night," she said. "The details are under investigation, but I want to make one thing clear. I won't be intimidated. This boutique is going to be a place where everyone feels welcome, and no amount of sabotage will change that." The reporters bombarded her with more questions, but Melissa held up a hand. "That's all I have to say for now. Thank you." As she stepped into the boutique, she was greeted by Rachel, who looked equally surprised by the commotion outside. "What's going on?" Rachel asked. "Someone leaked the story," Melissa said. "I don't know who, but it's already drawing attention." Rachel bit her lip. "Do you think it's safe to keep the store open today?" Melissa nodded firmly. "Yes. The best thing we can do is show that we're not backing down." Throughout the day, The boutique was busier than usual, thanks to the media coverage. Curious locals came in to shop and offer their support, while the staff worked harder than ever to keep up with the increased traffic. For the first time since taking over, Melissa felt a glimmer of hope. But as the afternoon wore on, a new text message appeared on her phone. "You're in over your head. Quit now, or things will get worse." Melissa's blood ran cold. Whoever was behind this wasn't giving up. She stared at the message for a long moment before forwarding it to Detective Harris, along with a single question. "What should I do now?" Melissa sat in her office, her hands trembling slightly as she stared at the forwarded message on her phone. "You're in over your head. Quit now, or things will get worse." The words felt like a punch to the gut, but she quickly shook off the fear. She couldn't let whoever was behind this win. Her phone buzzed with an incoming call, breaking her thoughts. It was Detective Harris. "Miss Carter," he said, his voice steady but concerned. "I got your message. Are you safe right now?" "Yes," Melissa replied, her voice firmer than she felt. "I'm in the office with the doors locked." "But this is escalating, isn't it?" "It is," Harris admitted. "This text is a direct threat. We're pulling your phone records to trace the source, but that takes time. In the meantime, I want you to stay vigilant and keep someone with you whenever possible." Melissa hesitated. "Do you think I should shut down the store temporarily?" "That's up to you," Harris said. "But I'd recommend staying open if you can. Closing the store might send the wrong message, that you're afraid. And that's exactly what they want." Melissa nodded, her resolve hardening. "Thank you, Detective. I'll keep you updated." After the call, Melissa stepped out of her office and into the bustling boutique. Customers were browsing racks of clothing, chatting with employees, and adding items to their carts. The sight gave her a flicker of hope. Despite everything, the store was thriving. But as she scanned the room, her gaze landed on a man standing near the back of the boutique. He wasn't browsing or interacting with the staff. Instead, he stood motionless, his eyes fixed on her. He was wearing a plain black jacket and a baseball cap pulled low over his face. Melissa's heart skipped a beat. Something about him felt off. She quickly made her way to Rachel, who was working near the register. "Rachel," she said quietly, "do you see that man in the black jacket?" Rachel glanced toward the back of the store and nodded. "Yeah, he's been standing there for a while. He hasn't picked anything up or asked for help." Melissa frowned. "Keep an eye on him. If he doesn't make a move soon, let me know." Rachel nodded, her expression serious. "Got it." Minutes turned into an hour, and the man in the black jacket still hadn't moved. He seemed to be watching the store more than browsing it. Melissa's unease grew with every passing second. Finally, she decided to approach him herself. She walked over, her steps confident despite the tension in her chest. "Hello," she said, her voice steady. "Can I help you find something?" The man didn't respond right away. When he finally looked at her, his expression was unreadable. "No, I'm just looking," he said flatly. Melissa held his gaze, her instincts screaming that something wasn't right. "If you need any assistance, feel free to ask," she said, keeping her tone polite. The man gave her a curt nod, but said nothing more. He turned and walked toward the exit, his movements stiff and deliberate. Melissa watched him go, her nerves still on edge. That evening, as the store closed, Melissa couldn't shake the feeling that the man in the black jacket was connected to the threats. She relayed the encounter to Detective Harris, who promised to review the store's security footage. "I'll have an officer posted outside your store tomorrow," Harris said. "Just in case." "Thank you," Melissa said. "I appreciate it." The next day started smoothly, with no sign of the man in the black jacket. The police officer stationed outside provided some reassurance, and customers continued to pour in, drawn by the media coverage of the recent events. But just as Melissa began to relax, Rachel came rushing into her office, her face pale. "Melissa, you need to see this," she said, her voice trembling. Melissa followed Rachel to the front of the store, where a small crowd had gathered outside. Someone had spray-painted the words, "Leave now," in bold red letters across the boutique's front window. The paint dripped down the glass, making the message look even more menacing. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd, and Melissa's stomach churned. This was no longer just a series of cryptic texts or subtle threats. This was a public, undeniable act of intimidation. Rachel touched her arm gently. "What are we going to do?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Melissa swallowed hard, her fear warring with her determination. "We're going to clean it up," she said firmly. "And we're going to keep going. They're not going to scare us into giving up." With the help of the staff and a local window cleaning service, the spray paint was removed within hours. But the incident had shaken everyone, and Melissa could feel the tension among the employees. That evening, as she locked up the store, she couldn't help but glance over her shoulder. The street was quiet, but the shadows felt heavier than usual. She climbed into her car and started the engine, her mind racing with thoughts of who could be behind the threats and what they might do next. Just as she pulled out of the parking lot, her phone buzzed again. She hesitated before glancing at the screen. The message read, "You should have taken the warning. Next time, it'll be worse." Melissa's hands tightened on the steering wheel, her jaw clenching as she fought back the wave of fear. Whoever was behind this wanted her to break, to give up, but she wasn't going to let them win. Melissa's hands trembled as she gripped the steering wheel, her mind replaying the ominous words of the latest text. "You should have taken the warning. Next time, it'll be worse." The escalation was undeniable, but so was her determination. She refused to be bullied into abandoning her late husband's dream or her mission to transform the boutique into a welcoming space. She parked in her driveway and sat for a moment, gathering her thoughts. The darkness of the night felt oppressive, every sound amplified in her heightened state of awareness. With a deep breath, she stepped out of the car, double-checking her surroundings before heading inside. The next morning, Melissa met with Detective Harris in her office. He sat across from her, his notepad open, his expression serious. "The message you received last night is troubling," Harris said. "And combined with the vandalism, it's clear this isn't just someone venting frustration. This is a calculated attempt to scare you." Melissa nodded, her jaw tight. "Do you have any leads? Any idea who might be behind this?" Harris hesitated before answering. "We're still reviewing the footage from your security cameras, and we've traced the threatening text to a burner phone. Unfortunately, that means whoever is doing this knows how to cover their tracks." Melissa's stomach sank, but she pushed through her disappointment. "So, what now?" Harris leaned forward, his gaze steady. "We increase your security. I've already requested a patrol car to be stationed near your store during operating hours, and I'd recommend installing additional cameras, especially outside." "Done," Melissa said firmly. "Anything else?"
Yes.
Harris's tone softened slightly. "You need to consider the possibility that this person might escalate further. Be cautious, Melissa. Trust your instincts, and don't hesitate to call me if something feels off." "I will," Melissa promised. "Thank you, Detective." The boutique reopened with the police patrol station just outside, a reassuring presence for Melissa and her staff. Despite the lingering tension, the day went smoothly. Customers continued to show their support, many praising Melissa for her courage. But just as she began to think the worst was behind her, a new complication arose. In the late afternoon, Melissa received a call from Gregory Miller, the corporate representative who had visited the store earlier in the week. His voice was clipped and formal. "Miss Carter," Gregory began, "I've been informed of the recent incidents at your store, including the vandalism and the threatening messages." "Yes," Melissa said cautiously. "It's been a challenging few days, but we're managing." "That's precisely why I'm calling," Gregory said. "Corporate is concerned about the impact these events might have on the store's reputation. As such, we're considering temporarily closing the boutique until the situation is resolved." Melissa's heart sank. "You can't be serious. Closing the store would only give whoever is behind this exactly what they want." "I understand your perspective," Gregory replied, though his tone suggested otherwise. "But corporate has to consider the safety of the staff and customers, as well as the potential liability if things escalate further." Melissa gritted her teeth. "I've already increased security, and the police are involved. We're taking every precaution." Closing the store would send the wrong message, not just to the person targeting us, but to our customers and this community. There was a long pause on the other end of the line before Gregory finally spoke. "I'll convey your concerns to the board, but I can't make any promises." Expect a decision within the next 24 hours. Thank you, Melissa said tightly before ending the call. She sat back in her chair, frustration and anxiety swirling in her chest. That evening, Melissa stayed late at the boutique, going over inventory and finalizing plans for a community outreach event she hoped would reinforce the store's new direction. As the clock ticked past closing time, Rachel knocked on the office door. "Melissa?" Rachel said, peeking inside. "I'm heading out for the night. Do you need anything before I go?" "No, I'm good," Melissa replied with a tired smile. "Thanks, Rachel. See you tomorrow." As Rachel left, Melissa felt a pang of unease. The boutique was eerily quiet, the shadows in the dimly lit store seeming to stretch and shift. Shaking off the feeling, she returned to her work. But then, a faint sound broke the silence, a soft, almost imperceptible creak. Melissa froze, her ears straining to identify the source. The sound came again, this time louder. It was coming from the main floor. Melissa grabbed her phone and crept toward the office door, her heart pounding. She peeked out into the store, her flashlight illuminating the rows of clothing racks and displays. Everything seemed still. Suddenly, a loud crash shattered the silence. Melissa's flashlight beam swung toward the source of the noise, landing on a shattered glass display case. Her breath hitched as she spotted a figure darting toward the exit. "Hey!" she shouted, bolting after the intruder. The figure moved quickly, but Melissa managed to catch a glimpse of their black jacket and baseball cap, the same attire as the man from the day before. They slipped out the door and into the night, disappearing before she could catch up. Melissa stopped just outside the boutique, her chest heaving. The shattered display case and the intruder's escape felt like a violation, a stark reminder that whoever was targeting her wasn't done yet. As she re-entered the store, her phone buzzed with a new message. She hesitated before looking at the screen. "This is your last warning. Next time, you won't be so lucky." Melissa's hands shook as she dialed Detective Harris's number, her resolve hardening despite the fear clawing at her chest. Melissa paced the boutique, her hands gripping her phone as she waited for Detective Harris to arrive. The shattered glass display case sparkled under the emergency lights, a chilling reminder of how close the intruder had been. The message still burned in her mind. "This is your last warning. Next time, you won't be so lucky." Moments later, Harris arrived, his calm demeanor a welcome contrast to Melissa's frayed nerves. He surveyed the damage, his sharp eyes missing nothing as he knelt to examine the broken glass. "Do you have footage of what happened?" Harris asked, looking up at her. Melissa nodded and led him to the back office, where she replayed the security footage. The grainy video showed the intruder in the black jacket and baseball cap moving swiftly through the store, their face obscured. They darted to the display case, smashed it with what appeared to be a crowbar, and bolted toward the exit just as Melissa's flashlight beam caught them. Harris frowned, leaning closer to the screen. "They're careful, kept their face hidden and knew where the cameras were. This isn't random. They've been watching you." Melissa felt a shiver run down her spine. "Do you think it's the same person who's been sending the messages?" "Most likely," Harris said, "but they might not be working alone. The timing, the escalation. It all points to someone with a personal grudge." "Corporate," Melissa muttered, her thoughts jumping to Gregory Miller's recent call. "Or maybe someone who doesn't like the changes I'm making. This feels too coordinated." Harris nodded, his expression grave. "I'll need a full list of employees, past and present, and anyone else who might have a motive. We're going to figure out who's behind this." The next day, Melissa tried to push through her fear, focusing on the boutique and its customers. The staff, shaken by the latest incident, rallied around her, their loyalty solidifying in the face of adversity. Emily, the young employee who had supported Melissa from the beginning, stayed close, her determination a source of strength for everyone. "Melissa," Emily said during a quiet moment, "I don't know how you're staying so strong. If it were me, I'd probably have quit by now." Melissa gave her a faint smile. "I won't let them scare me away. This store means too much, to me, to this community. If I give up, they win." Emily nodded, her admiration clear. "We've got your back. All of us." By the afternoon, things seemed to settle down. Customers filled the boutique, their presence a testament to the support Melissa had built. For a few hours, it felt like a normal day, until a delivery truck pulled up outside. Rachel approached Melissa, holding a clipboard. "We weren't expecting a shipment today, were we?" she asked. Melissa shook her head. "No. Let me check it out." She stepped outside to meet the delivery driver, who handed her a large, sealed package. The label read simply, "To Melissa Carter, boutique owner." Melissa's stomach churned. She hadn't ordered anything, and the lack of a return address set off alarm bells. She called Detective Harris immediately. "Don't open it," Harris said firmly over the phone. "I'm on my way." When Harris arrived, he examined the package carefully. "We'll need to have this checked by the bomb squad," he said, his tone serious. "It could be harmless, but we're not taking any chances." The staff and customers were evacuated from the boutique as the bomb squad arrived. The tension in the air was palpable as officers in protective gear examined the package. Melissa watched from a safe distance, her heart pounding. After what felt like an eternity, an officer approached Harris and Melissa. "It's clear," the officer said. "No explosives. Just this." He held up a small box from inside the package, its contents spilling out, a pile of shredded documents and a handwritten note. Harris took the note and read it aloud. "You're digging where you don't belong. Back off, or next time it won't be a warning." Melissa's hands clenched into fists as anger overtook her fear. "They're trying to scare me into giving up," she said, her voice shaking. "But I'm not going anywhere." Harris placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We're closing in on them, Melissa. Whoever's behind this is getting desperate. Desperation makes people sloppy. We'll catch them." That evening, Melissa returned home, exhausted but determined. She couldn't shake the feeling that someone was always watching, waiting for her to make a mistake. But instead of letting it consume her, she focused on the boutique and the people who believed in her. Just as she began to relax, her phone buzzed with yet another text. This time, it was a photo, a grainy image of her locking up the boutique, taken from a distance. "We're closer than you think." Melissa's breath caught in her throat. This wasn't just intimidation anymore. It was personal. She immediately forwarded the photo to Harris, her determination solidifying into steel. "They want me scared," she muttered to herself, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her edges. "But they're about to find out just how strong I am." Melissa stared at the grainy photo on her phone, her stomach twisting in knots. "We're closer than you think." The message was no longer just a vague threat. It was a declaration. Whoever was behind this wanted her to know they were watching her every move. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was Detective Harris. "Melissa, I saw the photo," he said, his voice sharp with concern. "This is a significant escalation. I need you to stay home tonight, lock all your doors and windows, and don't go anywhere alone." Melissa's jaw tightened. "I understand, but we can't keep playing defense. We need to find out who's doing this." "We're working on it," Harris assured her. "But this kind of thing takes time. In the meantime, your safety comes first. I'll have an officer stationed outside your house tonight." Melissa sighed, her fear bubbling just beneath the surface. "Thank you, Detective." The next morning, Melissa arrived at the boutique under the watchful eye of a police officer stationed near the entrance. The previous night had been sleepless, her mind racing with thoughts of who could be behind the escalating threats. But despite the fear, she walked into the store with her head held high, determined to keep moving forward. Her staff greeted her warmly, their support giving her a much-needed boost of confidence. Emily approached her as she settled into the office. "Melissa, I've been thinking," Emily said hesitantly. "Maybe the person doing this isn't just someone from outside. What if it's someone on the inside?" Melissa froze, the weight of Emily's words sinking in. "You mean one of the employees?" Emily nodded. "I don't want to believe it, but it makes sense. They know the store layout, the security cameras, even your schedule." Melissa's mind raced. It was a possibility she hadn't considered fully, but now it seemed almost obvious. She needed answers. Later that day, Melissa called a meeting with her staff. The tension in the break room was palpable as everyone gathered, their faces a mixture of curiosity and unease. "Thank you all for coming," Melissa began, her tone calm but firm. "As you all know, The store has been targeted by threats and vandalism. I won't sugarcoat it. This is serious. And I need your help. She scanned the room, watching their reactions carefully. Some nodded in agreement, while others looked uncomfortable. If anyone here has any information about what's been happening, anything at all, I urge you to come forward, she continued. This is about keeping all of us safe. The room was silent. Melissa waited, hoping someone might speak up, but no one did. She dismissed the staff, her disappointment weighing heavily on her shoulders. That afternoon, Detective Harris stopped by with an update. We've traced the burner phone used to send the messages to a local convenience store, he said. The clerk remembers selling it to a man matching the description of the intruder from your store. Melissa felt a flicker of hope. Do they have surveillance footage? They do, Harris said. It's grainy, but it's something. We're running the images through our database now. What about the text with my photo? Melissa asked. How could they have taken it? Harris's expression darkened. That's the troubling part. It was taken from inside the boutique, likely through one of the front windows. Whoever's doing this has been watching you closely. As evening fell, Melissa stayed late to work on the store's upcoming community event. The officer stationed outside gave her some reassurance, but she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Just as she finished organizing the event materials, she heard a faint noise near the back of the store. It was subtle, a soft scrape, like metal against metal. Her heart jumped, and she reached for her phone. Detective Harris, she whispered after dialing. I think someone's trying to get in. Stay calm, Harris said. Lock yourself in your office and don't make any noise. I'm on my way. Melissa did as he instructed, locking the door and grabbing a heavy paperweight as a makeshift weapon. She listened intently, every sound amplified in the silence. The scraping noise came again, followed by the faint creak of a door. Her breath caught in her throat. They're inside. Minutes felt like hours as Melissa waited, clutching the paperweight tightly. The sound of footsteps echoed faintly outside her office. Whoever was out there wasn't in a hurry, as if they were taunting her. Suddenly, the footsteps stopped right outside the door. Melissa's grip tightened, her heart pounding in her ears. A loud bang shattered the silence as someone tried to force the door open. Melissa screamed, backing away as the door rattled under the pressure. Harris, where are you? She whispered frantically into the phone. Almost there, Harris replied. Stay put. The door banged again, but before it could give way, the wail of police sirens pierced the air. The banging stopped, and Melissa heard hurried footsteps retreating. Moments later, Harris and a team of officers stormed the boutique, their flashlights sweeping through the darkness. Melissa unlocked the door and collapsed into Harris's arms, relief flooding through her. They got away, Harris said grimly, but we're closing in. This ends soon, Melissa. I promise. As Melissa drove home that night, exhaustion and fear weighed heavily on her. She couldn't help but wonder how much longer she could endure this. But as she parked her car and stepped into her house, she made a silent vow. No matter what, she would see this through. Her phone buzzed just as she locked the door. The message read, "You won't always have the cops to protect you." Melissa stared at the screen, her fear giving way to anger. Whoever was behind this had underestimated her resolve. You're the one who should be afraid, she thought, her determination burning brighter than ever. Melissa sat at her kitchen table, staring at the text. You won't always have the cops to protect you. The words simmered in her mind, each one stoking the fire of her resolve. She'd had enough. Enough of the threats, enough of the fear, enough of being made to feel powerless. Her phone buzzed again, but this time, it wasn't a threat. It was Detective Harris. We've identified the man in the footage from the convenience store, Harris said. His name is Paul Turner, a local with a history of harassment and intimidation. He's been linked to several incidents involving small businesses. The connection to your boutique makes sense, but we're still piecing it together. Melissa felt a flicker of relief. Do you know where he is now? We're working on locating him, Harris said. But I need to warn you, he might not be working alone. There could be others involved, possibly someone with insider access. The word insider sent a chill down Melissa's spine. You think it's one of my employees? It's a possibility, Harris said carefully. I suggest you keep a close eye on everyone, Melissa thanked him and hung up, her mind racing. She needed to uncover the truth, and fast. But she couldn't do it alone. The next morning, Melissa called an emergency meeting with her core team. Rachel, Emily, and a few other trusted employees. She explained the latest developments, including the possibility that someone on the inside was helping the person targeting the boutique. Rachel's face darkened. If that's true, it's a betrayal of all of us. I agree, Melissa said. And that's why I'm asking for your help. I need to know if anyone's noticed anything suspicious, conversations, behavior, anything that feels off. Emily hesitated before speaking up. There is something. I've noticed Collins, the manager, taking calls outside a lot lately. He always seems nervous afterward. Melissa frowned. Collins had been on thin ice since the incident where he dismissed her as just another shopper. Could he be involved? I'll talk to him, Melissa said. In the meantime, stay vigilant. If you see anything suspicious, let me know immediately. That afternoon, Melissa called Collins into her office. The manager looked uneasy as he sat down across from her, fidgeting with his watch. You wanted to see me? He asked. His tone clipped. Yes, Melissa said, folding her hands on the desk. I've noticed you've been taking a lot of private calls lately. Is there something you need to tell me? Collins's eyes widened, and for a moment, Melissa thought he might confess. But then he straightened, his expression hardening. I don't know what you're talking about. My calls are personal, and I don't see how they're any of your business. Melissa held his gaze. They're my business if they're connected to the threats this store has been receiving. Collins scoffed, but there was a flicker of fear in his eyes. You think I have something to do with that? That's ridiculous. Is it? Melissa pressed. You've made it clear you don't agree with the changes I'm making here. And now, we're being targeted by someone who seems determined to scare me away. Collins stood abruptly. This is absurd. I've been loyal to this store for years, and now you're accusing me of sabotage? I won't stand for it. He stormed out before Melissa could say another word. Her gut told her he wasn't entirely innocent, but without proof, she couldn't take any action. That evening, as the boutique closed, Melissa stayed behind to review security footage. The footage from the night of the break-in replayed on the screen, showing the intruder's movements in eerie detail. She watched closely, searching for anything she might have missed. Suddenly, something caught her eye. In one frame, the intruder's sleeve shifted slightly, revealing a tattoo on their wrist. It was small and partially obscured, but Melissa recognized the design. It was identical to one she'd seen on Collins's wrist during a staff meeting. Her blood ran cold. Could it really be him? Before she could process what she discovered, the boutique's front door rattled. Melissa froze, her heart pounding. She grabbed her phone and dialed Harris. Detective, someone's at the door, she whispered. It might be him. Stay put, Harris said. We're on our way. The rattling grew louder, more insistent. Melissa backed away from the door, clutching her phone tightly. The glass vibrated under the force of each shove, and she knew it was only a matter of time before it gave way. Just as the door burst open, Harris and his team stormed in, weapons drawn. The intruder, a man in a black jacket, bolted, but the officers were faster. Within moments, he was tackled to the ground and handcuffed. Harris turned to Melissa. Are you okay? Melissa nodded, her relief overwhelming. Yes, but I think I know who's helping him. Back at the police station, Harris interrogated the man, who confirmed Melissa's suspicions. Collins had been feeding him information about the boutique, security weaknesses, schedules, and Melissa's movements. In exchange, Collins had been promised a share of the boutique's profits once Melissa was forced to sell. When Harris shared the confession with her, Melissa felt a mix of anger and vindication. She had trusted Collins to help lead the store, and he had betrayed her and everyone else. What happens now? Melissa asked. Collins will be arrested, Harris said, and the man we caught will face charges for the break-ins, vandalism, and threats. Melissa nodded, a sense of closure beginning to settle over her. Thank you, detective, for everything. Harris smiled. You're tougher than most people I've met, Melissa. Don't let anyone make you think otherwise. The next morning, the boutique was unusually quiet. The fallout from the previous night's events weighed heavily on everyone, but Melissa felt a sense of relief for the first time in weeks. Collins had been arrested early that morning, his betrayal laid bare for all to see. The man who had terrorized her store was behind bars, and the looming shadow of fear had begun to lift. Melissa gathered her staff in the break room before opening the doors to customers. She looked around at their faces, Emily, Rachel, and the others who had stood by her through everything. Their loyalty had been the one thing she could count on, and she owed them her gratitude. "Before we start the day, I want to say thank you," Melissa began, her voice steady. "The past few weeks have been some of the hardest I've ever faced, but your support has meant everything to me. This store isn't just mine, it's ours. And together, we're going to make it stronger than ever." The staff broke into applause, their smiles a sign of the renewed hope they all felt. Emily stepped forward, holding a small bouquet of flowers. "This is from all of us," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "You've been so strong, Melissa. We're lucky to have you." Melissa accepted the bouquet with a lump in her throat. "Thank you, Emily. Thank all of you. Let's show this town what we're capable of." The boutique opened with a steady stream of customers, many of whom had heard about the recent events. Some came to shop, while others came simply to offer their support. Melissa made a point to greet each one personally, her heart swelling with gratitude for the community that had rallied around her. By midday, the boutique was bustling, the energy inside a stark contrast to the fear that had lingered for so long. Melissa found herself laughing with customers, helping them find the perfect items, and sharing stories about the changes she had planned. That evening, as the store closed, Melissa stood outside and looked up at the sign that bore the boutique's name. It wasn't just a business to her anymore. It was a symbol of resilience, a testament to what she and her team had endured and overcome. She turned to Rachel and Emily, who were locking up behind her. "How about we celebrate?" Melissa suggested. "Drinks and dessert at the cafe down the street." "My treat." Emily grinned. "I'll never say no to free dessert." The three of them laughed, their spirits lifted by the promise of brighter days ahead. As they walked toward the cafe, Melissa felt a profound sense of peace. She had faced her fears, fought back against those who sought to tear her down, and come out stronger on the other side. In the weeks that followed, the boutique thrived. Melissa's vision of inclusivity and warmth became a reality, and customers from all walks of life found a welcoming space within its walls. The community continued to rally around her, drawn not just to the store's offerings, but to the strength and kindness Melissa radiated. Even the corporate office, initially hesitant about her changes, recognized the boutique's growing success. Gregory Miller called to offer his congratulations, admitting that her approach had proven him wrong. "You've done something remarkable, Melissa," he said. "Keep it up." One evening, months after the chaos had subsided, Melissa stood outside the boutique as the sun dipped below the horizon. The storefront glowed warmly under the streetlights, and the laughter of customers inside spilled out onto the quiet street. Melissa smiled, her heart full. Her husband's dream had become her own, and she had fought to protect it with everything she had. As she turned to head home, she glanced at the boutique one last time and whispered, "We did it." She walked away, the sound of her steady footsteps echoing against the pavement, a quiet anthem of victory and resilience.